To discuss more on this topic, we're joined live by retired U.S. police officer Dominick Izzo. Glad to have you with us. Sorry that it has to be under these circumstances. So this is the fourth time an officer who defended the U.S. Capitol has taken his life. Suicide is always personal. No one can speculate as to the exact reasons, of course. But how big a role has the stress of that day played in this situation, do you think?
I'm going to take a very unpopular opinion on this, and none of these deaths, honestly, would pass the smell test. Based on the evidence I saw, which was like every other person in the world, in America, had seen, which was the video camera footage from people's cell phones and what the government chose to release. In all of my years as active service, and again, you have to remember, I'm going to go on a very, very unpopular opinion, not taking away from the tragic deaths of men who served and their choice to take their lives. It doesn't add up, in my opinion. I don't see any attribution from what happened on January 6th, the mostly peaceful protest, to being so pressurous for them to take their lives. Something else had to be going on in their lives. And this is based on all my years in law enforcement. This is what they see in Chicago on a daily basis for the last God knows how many years, every other state out there. I don't choose to believe that a mostly peaceful protest led to these men taking their lives on January 6th. This had to be something far more deeper. And it does sound like government, and it does sound like media manipulation to make it sound to pit civilians against law enforcement, or the other way around, to gain empathy at least. But it does not make any sense whatsoever. And again, it's an extremely unpopular opinion, but that's my view on this.
Now, you mentioned the media playing a role here. Some Western media outlets are claiming that the January 6th riots caused long-term psychological effects. It's clear from your answer that you don't believe this is the case.
No, I don't.
But what particular incidents that happened on that day could have led to this if this were the case?
The officer who took a hit to the head, that's 100%. I will say that absolutely could have caused brain trauma to having him make an unreasonable decision like taking their lives. But to have what we saw, we didn't see the riots like we saw in Kenosha, Ferguson, what we see in Chicago, to where officers are pitted against the civilians, and Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the destruction they cause, to being put in such a stress. The only thing, and this is what I will say that makes the most sense, that anybody who serves in law enforcement can understand, when you are pressured by those who are supposed to protect you, meaning your command staff, your government, the ones that you actually go out there and do the job and you have your back, when you're pressured by them, and your family is put at risk, that's where you're going to make some unreasonable decisions. I don't see the events happening on January 6th leading, again, it's unpopular. It may gain massive unfavor by police supporters. It does not make any sense that what happened on January 6th would lead these men to take their lives at all.
Let me probe you a little bit about that pressure you just talked about. Is it possible that the current probe into the events of January 6th is also a little bit to blame, that questioning these officers and revisiting these incidents acts as something of a mental trigger of sorts?
No, I'm going to go a conspiracy theory route. Let's just say, for argument's sake, right, that these officers were in somehow not doing their job. Maybe they were standing in the doorway, letting people come in and not preventing them from coming in. And again, I have no idea what happened on that day. Yes, if there's a probe going to be coming on and those officers were going to be held responsible or accountable for actions that would have made them look unfavorably, yeah, that would 100%, in my opinion, lead to them doing something that's that drastic.
Let's take a look at the bigger picture here. The subject of mental health issues is dominating U.S. media right now, with some commentators saying it affects everyone from Capitol police officers to U.S. Olympic athletes. Let's take a listen to some of what's being said.
Reaching out for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. And it's happening the same time we're talking about Simone Biles. So I think there's an intersection here that's very powerful. Both can send a message that mental health support is necessary, resources are inadequate, and we need to change the entire national conversation.
And again, I want to stress that no one can go into the mind of someone who is contemplating suicide because it's a very personal decision. But is this comparison at all fair, that the problems faced by U.S. police officers are similar to those suffered by Olympic athletes and people who operate at high-pressure situations?
They're going to be apples and oranges. I'm not taking away from what an Olympic athlete puts themselves through, because that's intense beyond words. But then again, what law enforcement sees dealing with children, victims, day in, day out, a repetition that is unmatched in human behavior. No, they're apples and oranges. You can't compare them at all.
Now, about media coverage in the U.S., specifically of the riots on January 6th and the various inquiries and the debates following it, what do you think generally of the whole situation?
I think it's political theater. I really do. I think until we start giving the same attention that we gave during the Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots of 2020, it's a joke. It's an embarrassment. And honestly, what I think they're doing with these officers' lives, based on the statements that I heard, it almost sounded like those were canned statements that were written for those wives. Again, it's a bad opinion, but that's what it sounds like it was written. Their lives are being used and leveraged for empathy for whatever side wants to leverage these air quotes riots, where we called them peaceful protests throughout the rest of the year. So I think this is abhorrent, using these officers' deaths to gain political leverage.
Briefly, how would you like to see the situation move forward?
As far as from the totality of it, or with the officers' lives?
Officers' lives, totality of it. How would you like to see America pick up the situation and go from here?
I'd like us to sit there and see exactly what happened. I mean, when we have these congressional hearings come up and you have these police officers talk about the N-word was used against them and they wore body camera footage, but the body camera footage is not being released to corroborate their stories. There's a lot that's going on that is just, it's not right. And we know, or we don't know. There's no proof out there. Everybody's going to have their own assumptions to be made, myself included. But unless there's full transparency, especially coming from Washington, D.C., I don't think the American people should believe a damn thing they hear from the government again.
Right. Without full transparency, it is a recipe for all sorts of craziness to come. Dominick Izzo, retired U.S. police officer. Very interesting to hear your thoughts here on Arch International.